Hi, everyone. I'm Summer,
I'm Carrie.
and this is Popecia Podcast.
I'm nervous.
Oh, don't be nervous. It'll be fine. Fuck. Oh my God. What the hell just happened? What the hell? What is happening? Make sure you come back. We're going to do this bi-weekly. So make sure you come back to talk to us more about, sex, drugs, and self-improvement. Welcome back, everybody. If you listened to the last episode, I made a comment about how we were going to discuss marriage.
Yes.
And the some common misconceptions and issues that some common issues about the way that we tend to talk about it. To kind of Okay, and so in the interest of full disclosure, Carrie and I started talking about this and doing an episode on this after somebody came at me on Twitter about because they could not understand, because I was talking about marriage as in the legal contract of marriage, and they could not understand that that is separate from your relationship.
Right.
Could not wrap their head around it. And so Carrie and I frequently have conversations about, first of all, we were raised in evangelical culture, which has some very definite ideas about marriage. So what were you taught marriage was?
We obviously grew up in the church, so I was taught that marriage is a reflection of your relationship with Christ, where he is number one, so your husband would be number one, and your relationship is supposed to reflect that. So you're supposed to be obedient to your spouse, for the woman, not the man. The woman's supposed to be obedient to the partner.
Patriarchy. And he's the quote unquote head.
He's the head of the house, just like God is head of the church.
Did they show you that stupid umbrella diagram?
Yes. It's like God and the church.
I will find that and splice it in. It's God, and then the man, and then the woman, and the kids are into that. Because you're not a godly wife if you're not obedient, damn it. I've literally heard, and people think I'm crazy, though, surely nobody says this. I've heard this in many, many, many churches. If he's being abusive or whatever, you're just not being a godly enough wife. However low he is the head, and however low he is, you have to get lower and push him up. That's your job as a godly wife. And you know what? Fuck you. If that's what you believe, that is so unhealthy and damaging and quite frankly fucking abusive. Do not ever say that to somebody, because I will call you on that every time.
And as somebody who is a part of the kink community, and when you're talking about dominant and submissive, it kind of reflects in that, the way people think that it is. Because everybody thinks the dominant is that one has all of the power, so people think that God and your spouse would be like that, and the submissive gives into whatever and does whatever the fuck they want. No, that's not how it works. It should be an equal partnership, and everybody should be going into it regardless of if you sign the piece of paper or not.
Right. And that's really what I wanted to get into, because this is what the person could not seem to grasp. Your relationship. And here's the problem. And I think part of the problem is because socially in this country, we are so socially influenced by that repressive religious ideas. I mean, our fucking federal holidays are informed by Christian holidays. A lot of the way we talk about things, this push is, and quite frankly, it's not just Christianity. It is American evangelicalism that really does inform the majority of this stuff, because they have become such a pervasive force in the last several decades. We've got to stop using the word marriage when you're talking about your relationship.
Yes.
I see articles, how to improve your marriage. No, you know how to improve your marriage? How you work on your marriage? Marriage is a legal property contract that affects your rights and responsibilities. The two people enter it with the state. You make the state a part of that arrangement, and then it gives them the right to determine what happens to your assets. It alters your rights and your legal protections, all of those things. It is a business contract. It is not the same as your relationship. You don't even have to be in a romantic relationship to be married. Not a requirement. So when you say improve your marriage, what you're talking about is further contracting those postnuptial agreements on how, okay, this is how these assets are going to be taken care of. This is how these assets are going to be taken care of. But that's not what most people mean when they say that.
Yeah.
They're talking about the relationship. And it is this conflation, I believe, is intentional by those people who have a persecution complex and talk about quote unquote culture war. So they want all of this. And this was also my objection when we were still fighting for gay marriage, was the whole concept of love is love and love won. It's not fucking about love. Legal marriage is not about love. Separate issues, very separate issues. You can have a perfectly happy, fulfilling relationship without being legally married. You can be legally married and it doesn't say anything about your relationship. Because that was the thing that this person on Twitter kept saying. It's like, well, she kept talking about baby mama culture, and I'm not even sure what the fuck that means exactly, because she wouldn't define it for me. But she's like, if you're an ex-wife, at least you tried. Okay, being married to somebody does not mean you tried. It doesn't mean anything except you signed a contract that altered your legal rights. And when I say altered legal rights, I need people to understand. It literally alters your rights and protections. For example, in the state of Oklahoma, where Carrie and I both live, if you are married, the definition of rape changes.
Yeah. Which is terrifying.
Marital rape is only considered rape if your spouse is the perpetrator, if it is quote unquote forceful. So if you are physically forced or threatened with a weapon, those things. Coercion doesn't count. Drugging you doesn't count. Yeah. It literally changes your legal protections. And it also changes your property rights and things. You are literally handing over everything you own and will own to this person.
It takes all of your like bodily autonomy. Like,
yes,
talking about like the rape and talking even just something like when a woman like gives birth and gets like an episiotomy and they do the fucking husband stitch because they know that you're married, or you can't have an abortion unless your husband says you can. Like,
you also and those are and the irony is, under HIPAA, they are not entitled to any of that information.
They're not.
Like, they are violating the law by consulting them because they are not the patient. But the same happens with sterilization. If you're married, they will. It's not. I've looked into this and talked to people from several different states. I couldn't find a state where it's actually the law. So apparently it's just a common practice in a lot of clinics where they want him to sign off because he might want to have more kids. It doesn't fucking matter if he wants to have more kids. Because if I don't want to, and I am the one putting my life at risk, because every pregnancy is a risk to the life of the patient.
Yeah.
That's my decision. And so, oh, he might want to have more kids. So you think it's okay for him to coerce me into being his incubator? No, thank you. Yeah. So anyhow, there's a whole lot of legal ramifications that come into it. But as someone who's law trained and a formerly practicing attorney, I am begging people. People say I'm anti-marriage. I'm not anti-marriage. The contract, although I think there are flaws in how it is executed, no other contract is legal without a disclosure of terms. I do think a disclosure of terms should be required. However, I'm not against people entering that contract, but it is a legal contract. So you should not enter into it without proper legal advice. You do not you do not go get married just because you love somebody. And it's got nothing to do with that. Two totally separate things. Now, we talked about in the last episode how like the True Love's Waits lady was like, so some churches are requiring their people to be legally married in order for them to recognize their relationship as legitimate. And I would just like to please encourage people to, if your cult's standard is requiring that, you should really look into that and consider potentially finding something that's a little bit less coercive, for one, because what if that legal contract is not in your best interest? Why on earth would anybody who has your best interests at heart want to coerce you into entering it? Because that is I will not get legally married again, because not because I have an issue with marriage, but I do have an issue with the terms that it creates in the state I'm in. You cannot disinherit a spouse, which means if I get legally married again, a good portion of my children's inheritance and everything I have built to leave to them will instead go to my spouse. And it doesn't matter what the prenup says. It doesn't matter what the will says. It's a forced share. If you're legally married, they are entitled to it. And I'm not willing to do that. And I quite frankly don't want to be with somebody who thinks that's okay to take from my children in that way, or that would think it was okay because, I mean, most men my age have kids, who would be okay with me taking from their kids in that way. So to me, that's just a sign we aren't compatible. But in any event, yes, I strongly discourage marriage from being a goal in dating. Oh, did you in your church upbringing, did they have you, what is this stupid book? Dating with a Purpose.
We didn't have Dating with a Purpose. I think, what was it called? I think I still have it somewhere because I like to look at it and laugh. I think it was called like Finding True Love or something.
Oh Lord.
Love, something along those lines. And it was all dating. It was dating with a purpose. Like the goal is
repackaged.
And you're right. That godly and leave room for baby Jesus between you two till marriage. Like, no.
Right. And the whole thing about Dating with a Purpose, the whole idea is exactly what it says. The purpose is basically you're treating dating like a job interview process to find your spouse. So the goal is this fucked up legal contract, which is weird, especially if you're trying to find somebody who's actually a partner to fulfill. Because remember, all of this is also in the context of compulsory monogamy, right?
Yeah.
Oh, I wish I had pulled up the hierarchy of needs. I will find a way to edit that in. The hierarchy of needs, right? So you've got the bottom band, which is the base needs, which are the physiological needs, and sex is in that. So that's, you get that covered. And then your physical needs, which ideally which is involved in the marriage contract. That's what you're negotiating in there. You're financially responsible for each other and housing and food and all of that. But then the actual emotional connections and intimacy and all of that goes midway, right? But under this concept of compulsory monogamy, they expect you to get all of that from one person. And like they even have this concept of emotional cheating, which just means any deep emotional connection with this person other than your partner. And then you're shamed for that, for having perfectly normal, valid, healthy relationships outside of that coupling. And so then the idea of dating with a purpose is you're basically interviewing candidates to be that one person. And I mean, I have never met a person. I have known many, like hundreds of people who did this. I have never met a single couple that did this that actually has a healthy, happy relationship. I've met many that are together for years, but not in a healthy way.
there is currently, like, I think, like, every few years, like, on any social media, except for maybe, like, Vine, because the videos were 6 seconds, but, like, on any social media, it seems like it goes through a cycle where cis men specifically go through this thing where they talk about how women ain't shit and, like, they're decreasing their value by having sex with people. And there's currently on TikTok a barrage of men saying that they're high value men and there's low value women because they sleep around and they're doing the key and lock analogy all over the fucking place, which is so stupid. And, like, they're all saying, like, the point of marriage is so that because women emotionally and physically only need one man, but men need more than one woman. And so trying to figure out that logic, like, even using their key and lock analogy, which is so dehumanizing because we're not fucking objects, first of all.
Well, and that,
like,
but that's what the whole idea of dating with a purpose or dating for marriage does.
it's
It
just so
reduces the
insane.
people because you're not making connections with people.
Yeah, no, like,
It's about treating those people as objects, and that's why it is such a disaster from step one.
it's
Because
so
it's so dehumanizing.
it's so ridiculous. And the thought of being called a low value person because
That
I
is
have
from
sex.
that phrase is from a specific podcaster that I can't
It
think of his
is.
name right now, and I'm trying to get it up here. But I don't want to put his name in here because I don't want to encourage people to go interact with his content. I have watched him because someone that I am involved with watches him.
Just going to interrupt for a brief moment to update that I am no longer involved with this person, and it is absolutely a direct result of those repressive gender stereotypes and patriarchal ideologies that he just could not seem to break free of. And I'm not here for it. So, no need for an intervention. I was able to assert boundaries. He was not about to have that, and so we parted ways. Now, back to the topic at hand.
And he had me watching him. I said, "You realize this is all evangelical bullshit? Everything I just heard. In fact, his speaking style." And then I looked him up, and turns out he's from more fucking Oklahoma. I said, "That's it," because I could, like, that was straight up evangelical preacher. Just his inflection, the way he talks, everything. I'm like, I said, I've heard all this bullshit. It does not change what I think.
Boiling every time because there's a bunch of creators on TikTok that I follow that talk about his videos. Specifically, there's a woman named Drew Afawalo. She is a Samoan creator, and I love her so much. She's wonderful.
I'll go look her up. I haven't.
All she does is roast men all day long, like roast the misogynistic, hateful, fatphobic, queer, roast, like queerphobic people, like all that kind of shit. That's all she does all day is roast those men and make fun of them, and I love her with my whole entire being. There is another woman on there named Kaylin Easley, and she is also a POC creator. And she does like these skits where she pretends to be these men and like tries to like reverse it and show them how ridiculous they're being.
I think you might have sent me one or two of these.
It is
of her.
It's fantastic. I love both of them. Go follow them on TikTok. I'm gonna send
I don't have TikTok.
the link
I'm an
so
old.
that she can post them down below because they're wonderful creators and I love them.
Send me links because I don't have TikTok. I'm an old.
I love them so much, but like they talk about these men and like the logic and the logistics behind what they're saying, because like it doesn't make sense when you break it down. Like for marriage purposes, they're saying women are only supposed to have one man in their life, but men can have as many women as they want, which doesn't make sense with the marriage contract and doesn't make sense with what they're saying like religiously, because religiously you're supposed to be monogamous. And
Well, in some religions, I don't believe in that, but yeah. I
in
mean,
Christianity,
right. It's unnatural. Well, I
it's,
don't know. Look at the
yeah,
Old Testament. How many wives does Solomon have? That's fullness land.
that is,
But it does make sense though. If we go back to what we talked about in the last episode about emotionally immature people, because what it really boils down to, because I understand the points, some of the points he was making. I understand how he got there,
mm-hmm,
but it's all rooted in relating to people only through roles and
right.
not connection. And so on this superficial level, it might quote unquote work as far as, getting needs met, getting the things you want, which is what I see a lot. I mean, I see a lot of women too, like, oh, they only want to be with a man if he's buying them stuff, paying for stuff.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay. And first of all, okay, I just want to say, I really need people to stop talking about marriage as the goal is just to have a quote unquote provider. If you want him to provide for you, that's fine. If you want a man to support you, but please stop the hypocrisy of pretending like it is somehow better because you're married. What you're doing, sweetie, is full immersion sex work.
Yes.
And as someone who used to do sex work, I have no problem with sex work. What I have a problem with is you getting uppity about it, like you're doing something somehow better because I'm his wife. Big fucking deal. He was still paying me to fuck him. I don't know why you think it's somehow better. But it's because of the stigma. And that's the whole point. We need to undo these stigmas because they don't make any sense. But anyhow, off my tangent, back to that. It really goes back to, I'm sorry, I'm really ADHD today, like way bad. I should have taken an edible
I think that would
to
be
slow
a great
my brain down.
idea for another episode.
It really would.
So.
But it really does come down to, and that is what I found in talking to this person that I know who made me watch those episodes. Well, he didn't make me, I agreed to, was that it really comes down to relating to people through roles and not connection. And so and unfortunately, because of the way a lot of American men are conditioned, that is the level that they're comfortable with in relationships and in how they relate to people. So of course that idea sounds very appealing. It's very black and white. It's very rule based, right? And so there's an absolute right, wrong, and it's all about roles. There's none of this messy emotional stuff. There's none of this emotional intimacy or connection. So they don't have to feel all those feelings. So I understand why it's appealing. Well, do I think it will result in a well-rounded, healthy relationships? Absolutely not. So if someone wants to continue to engage with that person, that's fine. But you need to be aware that you're going to have to get your emotional needs met somewhere else. So if you have this ridiculous concept of quote unquote emotional cheating, you need to find a fucking way to resolve that, because you're going to have an emotional relationship with someone else, or you're going to be deprived of that, which has a lot of negative consequences for your mental and physical health. Or ultimately what usually happens is, if they are trying to stay deprived of that because they've agreed to not have all of their needs met that can't be met within that relationship, is it eventually blows up because you're miserable. Right? And so you either have to find a good balance where you're getting all of that met, and being realistic, or it's eventually going to fall apart.
Yeah, because it's like making somebody cut off like the emotional like connections with people, like that's cutting off your friendships, that's cutting off like people in your family, like that's abuse. And why
And also,
don't get a relationship like that?
right, it is. And also the thing you mentioned earlier about I can have multiple partners but she cannot, that is an abusive idea. It is treating the person. Okay, here's the way I explain this, because I had this conversation recently. I don't think having having other partners is a bad thing. Okay. However, if you think it would be bad to be done to you, right? If um if it's a bad thing when it's done to me, then if I turn around and do it to Carrie, I am mistreating her deliberately and consciously. It does not matter if Carrie thinks thinks that behavior is bad. I have said it's bad because I set a boundary that you can't do it to me. So then if I am turning around and doing it to Carrie, I am deliberately mistreating her. That is abusive behavior.
Yeah.
There's no wiggle room there. It's either bad or it's not. And you cannot, that is the minimum standard of how you should treat people. And I really, really encourage people to have those boundaries. So in any event, I'll go off my soapbox on that. But yes, that's the thing. Like, I don't have a problem with people, and I've been in polyamorous relationships before, and all of that. I don't have a problem with that. But I do have a problem with somebody thinking they should be entitled to put rules on their partners that they will not abide by themselves.
Yeah,
because you're treating them as lesser. You're treating them as less of a person than you.
I read like a bunch of writings from poly people on like FetLife, from polyamorous people, excuse me. And it's just like, it's so hard. It was so hard for me to like wrap my head around it growing up evangelical, where you're supposed to be monogamous, like in American.
Oh, we're taught that that's natural.
Like,
that's normal. That's the way God made us. Like,
it's
they literally tell us that bullshit. And it's not true. It's a blatant lie.
And it's still so hard for me to like break out of that mindset, and I catch myself doing it, because I will tell people like I'm cool with poly and like I don't mind doing it, and then like I still get my feelings hurt when stuff happens. And so I'm teaching myself and like making myself get out of that like toxicness, because that is horrible. And like I think more people should be able to admit that, because like there's no way that I'm going to be able to provide emotionally like everything that somebody needs. Like, I'm just not.
One person can. One person can. We are collective people. We are community people. And so emotional, bonds come in. We should have deep emotional bonds with many, many people.
Yeah.
Like, that's how we're made. But as far as like the sexual thing, when I realized, what really made me get to the point where I said, you know what, I don't have the right to put that restriction on someone, was to really realize that by doing so, I am treating them like property. Because really, when it comes to property rights, one of the primary property rights, a little law school lesson here, one of the primary property, there's four things in this bundle of rights, but one of the primary ones is the right of exclusion. Okay. I get to use this and no one else does without my permission. And that's really what we're saying about our partner. Or as I talked to my sister the other day about this, and as she put it, no one else gets to touch my sex dispenser. That's literally what when you break it down, that's really what we're saying. But we have been so indoctrinated in just the last couple generations. And it's really only been the last couple generations that we have been taught to expect this as women, to expect this from men. Because prior to that, like 20 years ago, I spent many, 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 many hours volunteering at nursing homes. So, I was talking 100-year-old people, that 20 years ago. So we're talking, the parents and grandparents of the boomers. None of them expected that.
Yeah.
Literally all the men and women, both. And I know we talk about patriarchy and all of that, but really most of them were like, no, it's not realistic to expect. Like, of course, somebody's going to step out here and there, especially when you're together for 50 or 60 years. And the men would tell me, my primary concern was just, most of them, like, they didn't want to not know if the kid was theirs, right? Like, that was their concern. But other than that, so...
Just want to pause real quick here to clarify, because I realized in the editing process that what I was trying to say wasn't quite clear. I'm not saying that quote unquote infidelity was not a concern or an issue, or was always shrugged off in previous generations. What was explained to me by these elders was that it wasn't a relationship deal breaker, which is a very different thing. As one woman put it, you know, you get mad, you get upset, you'd fight for a while, but then you'd stay together. And also, it's important to remember that people had to be legally married at that time. It was illegal in most places to live together, not married. And unless you're wealthy, even today, unless you're wealthy, divorce is financially devastating. So it was actually pretty rare for people to divorce just based on that. In fact, women usually couldn't get a divorce on those grounds. Men were almost always let by with that. However, men did divorce women with the grounds being listed as adultery. But what's been explained to me and what I can find in looking through histories and memoirs and things from those generations is that very often that wasn't the real reason. It was just weaponized shame. It was a reason that was cited in order to publicly shame because of purity culture, sex shaming, sex is shameful, and having sex with somebody who's not your husband is even more so. So it was very much about a way to harm and not actually an act of adultery. In fact, very often those alleged acts weren't even proven in those courts, so probably didn't even happen. So that's my point, is we've got to stop conflating and going along with the fairy tale idea and start looking at the reality, in that it's very much about these ideas are very much about property and control, and not about love or healthy relationships. And our assertion here is just that we should be focusing on healthy relationships and less so on creating, on prioritizing property contracts or treating people like property.
It really wasn't considered a deal breaker at that time like it is now. So it's really only been the last few generations that this has been expected, and we've like had this pendulum swing to where we're so unrealistic because humans, they're human, and we act like this is the ultimate betrayal. And I mean, we're talking, the research shows like the vast majority of people who are supposedly monogamous have sex outside of their relationship.
Yeah.
And that's self-reporting numbers. And it was like in the 70 something percent. I should have looked this up. And so then when you add to that, there's an old truism about there's a quarter of people who still don't admit, in these surveys, even if there's not a chance, there's usually roughly a quarter of the people who have also done it but won't admit to it.
Yeah.
And if you add that, you're looking at 99%. So almost all of these monogamous, quote unquote monogamous relationships aren't actually monogamous in practice. They just
want you to think they are.
Say they are. They want to, and they want to think to themselves that they are. And so then we hear about this is the ultimate betrayal because they did a very human thing and had sex with someone else. But then there's like all these other factors that they're not looking at. Like, what is the betrayal? Having sex is not an inherently bad thing. So that's not the bad thing they did.
Yeah.
So what, they broke your arbitrary rule? A rule that you really didn't have a right to put on them in the first place, right? Now, the problem actually lies in you guys agreed to something and they broke that. So why are you focusing on who they fucked or that they fucked someone else and not the fact that really the problem was the lies, the deceit, whatever. But people don't want to focus on that because then it gets more complicated, right? Because the reality is, were they free to say no? They might have actually thought that they could be monogamous at the time they made that agreement. Things happen we don't plan. they might have felt like it was a choiceless choice, you know, especially if they're already invested in this and this is going well, then they're like, yeah, you know, of course, because they don't want to lose you. And that's not always a lie. Sometimes it is a lie and manipulation, but it's not always. Sometimes they really had good intentions.
Yeah.
But we blow it up into this whole big thing. But I really think it's it's exacerbated by this whole idea of purity, because of purity culture, right? Because sex is this big, shameful, taboo thing. And especially outside of marriage. Like, I've reached the point I refuse to use words like affair, mistress, all of those things, because they are deliberately stigmatizing language to try to delegitimize those relationships.
Yeah.
But you know what? Those relationships were legitimate enough to those people who were in them.
I've effectively, like,
none of my fucking business.
Words from my vocabulary, like, I couldn't tell you the last time I used them. Like, you're treating that other person as if they are not a person, and they may not have even known that the person they were seeing is married or in a relationship. Like,
oh, absolutely,
that changes everything. Like, they thought that they were in something, and this person lied to them when they had this going on over
right.
here. Like, the whole problem is the person that's lying, and nobody wants to focus on that because they want to think that, like you said, that this person, like, had some kind of extenuating circumstances that made them do it when they most generally didn't have that. And so they want to think that they can still be with this person because they love them or whatever, like, that, because for whatever reason, like, it just doesn't make sense to me.
Right. And I mean, the lying is
So,
the lying is the issue, is an issue, yes. But are you going to have the same reaction if they're lying about something else?
Yeah.
Probably not. That's the thing, is this disproportionality, because if they lied to you about that, they probably lied to you about some other things too. But if you're okay with that, like, it's not, the reaction isn't really fitting what's happening.
So, for clarification, the point is not that all their other relationships outside of yours shouldn't matter to you, or that you don't have a right to feel how you feel about that. The point is that lies and deception related to that are very much the same as lies and deception related to other things. Now, how you feel and to what degree that matters to you, you know, is going to vary by the individual. But the point is, if this one is more significant to you because of the sexual aspect, that's something to examine. And if it's just because of the, you know, it's a repeated unhealthy pattern where they're doing this to hurt you, then it's not about the sex at all, is it? It's about that pattern. And the reality is that pattern is probably playing out in other scenarios as well that you're choosing to overlook because it's not this horrific, you know, sexual nature. And that's something that needs to be examined, because you should not be tolerating that sort of mistreatment. And I hope that you will take a look at that and find a safe way out if that's the situation.
But when you mentioned the third party, every time that conversation comes up, then I hear that, well, they shouldn't mess with married people, they should whatever. And so it comes back to this whole idea of quote unquote marriage as a social contract. Okay, social contracts require a standard definition and understanding within the society of what those parameters are. That does not exist in the United States, because marriage is a legal contract. Just because somebody's married does not mean they can't have other partners. There are many people who consensually have that arrangement where you can have, you know, they're not monogamy is not a requirement to get married in the United States. There is no social contract that exists universally in the United States with regards to marriage or relationships in general at all. It's not there. Get that fantasy out of your head. They exist in small amounts in communities, like in your own religious circle, maybe. But honestly, if you start talking to people, everybody's going to most of the time, unless it's very, very strict, like the fundamentalist groups, they have very rigid ideas. But the further out you get from that, most of them are like, well, the two people set the parameters, they set the relationship up how it works for you. That means there's no fucking social contract.
Yeah.
So no third party owes you anything. That's between you and your partner. Doesn't matter how many other people there are involved over there, they don't owe you anything. So if my man fucks 14 people, none of them people owed me anything.
Yeah.
None of them. None of them.
Yeah.
That's between me and that person. That's it.
It's a hard thing to like break out of, especially like if you were raised in it. Like, it's so hard. I still struggle with it sometimes because it's so like
Ingrained.
deeply ingrained into me.
Well, and that's the problem with the indoctrination. And a lot of times, particularly with people, we have a slightly different perspective because we've deconstructed a lot of that indoctrination. But people who who haven't done that, or who are still at least fundamentally believe in that teaching, they're stuck in that, because to rethink that really is rethinking their entire world. And I promise they would be much happier if they could do that, but
it changes a lot of your core
getting
values
there is
as a person, and that's
right.
really difficult to accept. Truly, like it really is.
It really is. It really is difficult. I believe we would be much better as a whole community if we could do that, and because those ideologies treat people like objects and not people. I do think that if we could break out of that and get away from that, we would be much better, because we do need to be treating people like people.
Yeah.
And that's not just a man thing or a woman thing. That's a universal issue that I'm seeing, is treating other people like objects instead of people.
Yeah, because like that really has no gender identity.
Right.
That is a value thing. Like, you don't value the other person, you don't value what they give you, you don't value like anything related to it, and so you treat them as an object, you treat them as something to own,
or they're treating them like,
what?
or they're relating to them in those roles.
Yeah.
Right, like we talked about that. And so they're only what they can add to you and what they can do for you. Well, that's still treating them like an object, because you aren't making a connection with that person. You're not even seeing them as the whole person, really. You're just evaluating what they, quote unquote, bring to the table, and so it's very transactional. And keeping it at that transactional level never treats the parties as full people.
Yeah.
So feel free to comment. Be nice to be kind to each other. We can handle you being mean to us, but be kind to each other. We would like to, we're always open. As you saw in the last video, we read the book that was recommended. So we do actually listen and read those comments. So feel free to interact and give your.
Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. And if you want to make sure you don't miss any of the uploads, be sure to turn on those notifications so you will know as soon as those go up. Also, like us on social media at Hypoxia Podcast, or the easiest way is to go to our website, hypoxia.com. That's HOPOKSIA.com. And the links to all the socials and all the podcast feeds are right there. And we just want to thank you all for sharing your time with us, hanging out with us, and we hope to spend more time with you in the future.